I do my best to engage with all of you that take the time to leave comments and send emails, even though I'm far behind on that, but I am catching up. I feel like I've come to know a good deal of you in a sort of way. One man has been there from the very start. Good old Jim from the channel Cemetery Visits. When Jim came across this channel and subscribed, there were less than 100 subs. Jim saw something in the channel that I never did though, and was always there for a good old pep talk and different ideas about this, that, or the other. And well, here we are, less than a year and a half later, with an audience I never thought possible. Jim still gets me every now and again with a friendly, "I told you so." So, I'm thrilled to be looking at a story recommended to me by Jim himself, someone I've playfully referred to before as the godfather of Dixie After Dark. Centralia, West Virginia is one of the state's more remote communities. Always has been. Many people would think that this would shield them from the more strange or bizarre things we've covered here in the past. But I think that this remoteness tends to bring more of that out. Case in point, for the longest time, a spirit could be spotted in Centralia, walking along a train tracks, stooped over, headless, being led along by another mysterious gray specter, the pair apparently looking for the lost head. But you know what? That's not the crazy part. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture, some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. Centralia, West Virginia is a small, unincorporated community in Braxton County. When I say small, we're talking about only a dozen homes and one general store, even though it's only about 20 miles from the nearest interstate. Centralia gets its name for not only being in the center of the county, but it sits dead center in the state as well. No, it's not the same Centralia that has the underground fire that's been burning for decades. That's Centralia, Pennsylvania. Yeah, that had me confused at the start as well. Braxton County itself is known as a paranormal hotspot, being the home of the Flatwood Monster, a multitude of Bigfoot sightings, and haunted sites such as the Hammond House and Elk Hostel. Seems there's something up with the county itself, either drawing things like this to it, or perhaps creating things itself. Either way, being dead center of the county, Centralia would not be left out of the party. Today's legend goes back to the 1800s, when the Baltimore and Ohio Railway was laying track across West Virginia. The railroad brought a lot of jobs to the area, but since the jobs were constantly moving along as new tracks were added, most of the workers were drifter types, content with staying on the move at the same pace as the railroad itself. One of these drifters that made their way to West Virginia was a man named Jacob Beamer. Unlike the other drifters though, Beamer settled in Centralia after the railroad work moved on. Beamer became quite the character in Centralia. He was described as an eccentric kind of person, prone to late night walks, especially when the moon was full. Being in the hills of Appalachia, people loved talking about their ancestors and where they originated from, and Jacob Beamer was no different. Unlike the others in the area, though, who mostly traced their families back to either Ireland or Scotland, Beamer's lineage came from farther away, much farther. Jacob Beamer claimed that his family originated from the moon. Yep, the moon. According to Beamer, he was the descendant of a race of people that lived on the moon for ages, much longer than people lived in the United States. Beamer claimed that there was a time when his people had the ability to travel back and forth between the moon and Earth. But on one of his ancestors' visits, a terrible accident happened. A meteor roared past the Earth, close enough that it caused great earthquakes across the globe and changed the magnetic poles. And according to Beamer, this is what caused the formation of the continents. The earthquakes so massive that the solid landmass that was once Earth broke apart into what we have today. But for Beamer's ancestors, this wasn't the tragic part. The meteor not only caused devastation to the Earth, but it upset the orbit of the moon as well, sending the moon farther out into space than it had originally been, preventing his ancestors from being able to make the voyage back home. They were stranded now, here on Earth, and had to adapt to a whole new way of life. Not all was lost, though. You see, Beamer's ancestors always had a direct connection back home in the way of what he called a guardian moon spirit. A spirit that they were able to speak with directly. A spirit that Jacob Beamer claimed was still there and spoke with him regularly. The moon spirit told every surviving member of the Beamer family line their history, and that they were the last remaining survivors of a once thriving lunar civilization. The disruption to the moon's orbit destroyed the once thriving ecosystem on the moon, and no life forms survived there. This was Jacob Beamer's story, and he never strayed from it. He didn't care who believed him or not. His account never wavered, and he spoke of it nonchalantly, as someone that would talk about their Irish or Scottish ancestors. As time rolled on, the people of Centralia began to believe Jacob Beamer, and talk arose that this was the reason for his late-night full moon strolls. This was when he was in communion with his guardian moon spirit, and these nights gave him the best view of a home that he would no longer be able to return to. It was during one of these late-night strolls that tragedy again struck the Beamer lineage, this time in the form of a train. In 1890, Jacob Beamer was hit by a train, the deep valleys and thick forest of the area dampening the sound of the approaching engine. Beamer's body was found next to the train tracks the next day, decapitated. The people of Centralia gathered up Beamer's remains and buried them, all except for the head. Try as they might, they were never able to locate Beamer's missing head. They searched high and low for it, but were never able to find it. Eventually, they decided that it must have been destroyed completely, rolled off into the Elk River and lost underneath what is now Sutton Lake, or simply carried away by the train itself. On full moon nights after that, especially around the anniversary of Jacob Beamer's death, people started witnessing strange, unexplained events. Immediately after the death, and for years and years afterwards, people reported moonbeams shining down directly on the spot that Jacob Beamer's body was found. But that wasn't all. People would also witness a headless ghost walking up and down the tracks. But the ghost was not alone. It was always accompanied by what they described as a grayish, formless spirit. A ghost that did not have the humanoid shape that the headless spirit had. This gray spirit was said to lead the headless spirit around by the hand, both of them appearing to keep their focus on the ground, apparently looking for the missing head. It was easy enough to assume that the headless ghost was that of Jacob Beamer, but the appearance of the second spirit left little doubt in the locals' minds. For them, this had to be the guardian moon spirit that Beamer always talked about, still by the Beamer family's side, still aiding Beamer, even in the afterlife. The sightings continued regularly for about 40 years, up until the 1930s. The last reported sighting comes from a deer hunter that was visiting the area from Pittsburgh, making his way back home after a long day's hunt. It had gotten dark before he was able to make it back to his truck, so he took to the train tracks to make his walk in the dark a bit more easy. Not far from his parked truck, the hunter froze in place as he saw two spirits wandering not far ahead of him in the bright light of the full moon. Being unfamiliar with the local legends, he didn't know what to do. He stood still, frozen in terror, as the two spirits approached. He described one as headless and dressed in old clothes. The other, he said, was more wraith-like in appearance, shrouded in a gray covering from head to toe. The two spirits continued on their way, never looking or even acknowledging the hunter, but their passing gave him a good look at them. According to the hunter, the headless spirit held a gleaming white skull in the crook of its arm. He watched as the two apparitions moved off the train tracks, entered into a thicket of rhododendron bushes, then disappeared into the shadows. The terrified hunter told locals about what he saw, and they all but laughed at how scared he was. They told him the story of Jacob Beamer, and that he was harmless. There was nothing to be scared of. He was a citizen of Centralia, regardless of whether he was living or not. But after that night, the ghost of Jacob Beamer and his guardian moon spirit was never seen again. The townspeople were reminded of the hunter's account and how he described the headless spirit carrying a skull that night. The locals now believe that Beamer must have finally found his missing head, and now Jacob Beamer must finally be at rest. Those fateful railroad tracks in Centralia are now long gone, having been removed in the 1950s before the creation of Sutton Lake. But ghost hunters and paranormal investigators still visit the meadows around the lake where the tracks once ran, in an attempt to see the spirit of Jacob Beamer. But locals say their efforts are all in vain. Even though there have been a few sporadic reports from ghost hunters of strange events and even sightings, the people of Centralia don't believe them. They believe the account of the visiting hunter from the 1930s. They believe Jacob Beamer finally found what he was looking for and is no longer there. Whether it be that Jacob Beamer is now resting in peace, or that he was guided back to his family's homeland by his guardian moon spirit may be the subject of dispute amongst the locals of Centralia. But either way, Jacob Beamer is no longer in Centralia, according to them anyway. He is now at peace, where he was buried, in the afterlife, or back home, amongst the stars.